There is a piece of paper in the Gestapo's wartime files that reads, "She is the most dangerous of all Allied spies. We must find and destroy her." The woman this was written about was 36 years old. She was American. She spoke French with an accent. She had been rejected by the US Foreign Service, rejected by the British military, rejected by her own government at almost every turn, and she had one leg. The left one was gone below the knee, replaced by a wooden prosthetic she had carried since 1933. She'd named it Cuthbert. When it hurt, and it usually did, she talked to it like a difficult colleague. She never asked anyone for sympathy about it. She never mentioned it unless she had to. The Gestapo called her the Limping Lady. They plastered wanted posters of her across every occupied city in France. Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, one of the most feared men in the Nazi intelligence service, reportedly told his officers, "I would give anything to get my hands on that limping Canadian bitch." She wasn't Canadian. But he was never going to get his hands on her regardless. In 3 years of operating in occupied France, Virginia Hall killed 150 German soldiers, captured 500 more, blew up 4 bridges, derailed dozens of freight trains, organized the escape of 12 captured agents from a Nazi prison, trained 3 battalions of resistance fighters, and sent intelligence back to London that shaped the entire Allied understanding of German operations in central France. The Gestapo had 500 agents specifically assigned to find one woman. They never caught her, and until about 20 years ago, almost no one in America knew her name. This is Virginia Hall. The most dangerous spy of World War II. Let's fix the fact that you haven't heard this story. Virginia Hall was born in Baltimore, Maryland in 1906. Into money, into comfort, into a world that had a very specific set of expectations for a woman of her background. Marry well, manage a household, be charming and decorative and quiet. She was having none of it. Her high school yearbook described her as the most original in our class. She showed up to school one morning wearing a bracelet of live snakes around her arm and considered this an entirely reasonable choice. She studied 5 languages: French, German, Italian, Russian, and Spanish, with the focused determination of someone who intended to use them. She attended 4 different colleges, including Radcliffe and Barnard. What she wanted was a career in diplomacy. She wanted to serve her country in the Foreign Service, traveling, negotiating, doing the actual work of international affairs. She applied for a consular position. The State Department rejected her. Women, it explained, were not admitted to the Foreign Service in any meaningful capacity. She applied again. She was rejected again. She got herself assigned as a consular clerk, the lowest possible tier, and worked in Turkey, Italy, and Estonia, doing actual good work, while the positions she deserved went to men with fewer skills and less ability. She applied for a consular position several more times and was rejected several more times. And then in 1933 in Turkey, she went hunting. She tripped. Her gun discharged. The bullet hit her own leg. The infection was too advanced by the time surgeons reached it. They amputated her left leg below the knee. The Foreign Service, which had already been finding reasons to reject Virginia Hall, found a new one: amputation of a limb except fingers or toes. His cause for rejection, that was the official policy. Her wooden leg disqualified her from the career she had been building through every form of discrimination they could throw at her. She had been given a second chance at life by surviving the accident. She was not going to waste it on bitterness about a government that had failed her. She would find another way to serve. World War II was about to provide one. When Germany invaded France in May 1940, Virginia Hall was in Paris. She volunteered immediately as an ambulance driver for the French army. She drove through the chaos of the collapse of France, bombs falling, refugees flooding the roads, the French military disintegrating around her. She saw what was happening. She understood it with the clarity of someone who had spent years studying European politics and spoke the language of every country involved. After France fell, she made her way to England through Spain. On the boat, she met a British intelligence officer named George Bellows. He was impressed by her languages, her composure, her clearly exceptional mind. He gave her a phone number. The number was for Nicholas Boddington of the Special Operations Executive, the SOE. Winston Churchill had ordered it created with 3 words, "Set Europe ablaze." Its mission was sabotage, espionage, and the organization of resistance networks across occupied Europe. It was dangerous work. Most agents who were captured were tortured and executed. The SOE had never sent a female agent to live permanently in occupied France. They interviewed Virginia Hall. They were initially doubtful, a woman, an American accent, and she walked with a limp that made her recognizable. 3 separate reasons why this couldn't work. Hall disagreed with all 3 objections. She could change her accent, she could change her appearance, she could control how she walked. What she had that most people didn't was 5 languages, years of European experience, exceptional composure under pressure, and a willingness to operate behind enemy lines while knowing exactly what would happen if she was caught. The SOE hired her. In August 1941, Virginia Hall became the first female SOE agent deployed to live and operate in occupied France. Her cover, an American journalist working for the New York Post. Her real job, build the Allied intelligence network in Lyon, the center of the French resistance. Lyon in 1941 was the most important city in Vichy France, the southern zone that the Nazis had allowed the collaborationist French government to nominally control. It was also, because of its geography and its large working class, the heartbeat of French resistance to the occupation. Hall set up her network, which she called Heckler, with methodical precision. She recruited carefully a pharmacist who could provide medical supplies and a safe house, a doctor who treated resistance fighters without reporting them, a police inspector who looked the other way at the right moments, a local priest, a brothel madam who had extraordinary intelligence about the movements and habits of German officers, who became one of Hall's most valuable assets. She ran safe houses for downed British pilots, getting them forged papers, civilian clothes, and escape routes out of France through Spain. She mapped German military positions and troop movements, radioing the information back to London in coded transmissions. She kept meticulous records of what she was learning, German unit designations, supply routes, the location of arms depots, the names of collaborators, and the identities of Gestapo informants in the resistance. London began to understand that they had someone exceptional in Lyon. In 15 months, Hall handled more operations, rescued more agents, and generated more intelligence than almost any other SOE operative in France. She became the person in Lyon that other agents were told to contact when they arrived in country. She was, in effect, running the entire Allied intelligence operation in the south of France, as a civilian with forged papers on one good leg in the middle of a city under Nazi occupation. In the spring of 1942, 12 SOE agents were captured by the Germans and held in Mauzac prison in the Dordogne. Their situation was desperate. Captive agents were interrogated, and interrogation meant torture, and torture meant that networks would be compromised and more people would die. Hall organized their escape. It required bribing a prison guard. It required forging papers and establishing a safe house in the woods. It required coordinating the movement of 12 people in different locations across occupied France, all without a single communication that could be intercepted. It required trusting exactly the right people and identifying exactly the right moment. On July 15, 1942, all 12 prisoners escaped. The SOE historian MRD. Foote later called it one of the war's most useful operations of its kind. The Gestapo was furious. They flooded Lyon with 500 agents specifically tasked to find whoever had organized the escape. They didn't yet know who they were looking for, but they knew there was someone they needed to find. The noose was tightening around Virginia Hall without her quite knowing yet how tight it was becoming. Klaus Barbie arrived in Lyon in November 1942. He was one of the Gestapo's most effective interrogators and one of its most brutal. He would later be tried and convicted as a war criminal for the torture and execution of thousands of French civilians and resistance fighters. He earned the nickname the Butcher of Lyon. Barbie had one particular obsession among his many responsibilities in Lyon: finding the woman his intelligence reports kept mentioning. The woman who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere. The woman who had helped organize a dozen prison escapes. The woman who had somehow made Lyon a fortress of Allied intelligence while operating under his nose. The woman who limped. The composite sketch on his wanted posters looked nothing like Virginia Hall. She had changed her appearance too many times, used too many aliases, moved too many safe houses. The sketch was a guess. The Germans knew she limped. They thought she was Canadian. They didn't know her name, her nationality, her real cover story, or what she actually looked like. Barbie reportedly told his officers, "I would give anything to get my hands on that limping Canadian bitch." He never understood the woman he was hunting was American. Hall, for her part, knew the net was closing. She had built her network carefully. But a double agent, a French Catholic priest named Robert Alesh, who was working for German intelligence, had been feeding information about her contacts to the Gestapo. Wireless operators she had recruited were being arrested. Safe houses were being raided. When Germany moved to occupy Vichy France on November 8, 1942, Hall understood that Lyon was no longer survivable. She fled without telling anyone, not her closest contacts, not her most trusted agents. She took a train to Perpignan near the Spanish border and prepared for the crossing, the Pyrenees, November. A mountain pass at 7,500 feet, temperature below freezing, 50 miles of terrain that would be difficult for a fit, two-legged person under normal circumstances. Her guides initially refused to take her. She was a woman and she walked with a limp. They didn't think she could do it. She told them she was going regardless of what they decided. They took her. The crossing took 2 days. The pass was snow-covered. The cold was severe. And her prosthetic, Cuthbert, was, as she described it in the understatement of the century, giving her trouble. The socket where the wooden leg attached was rubbing against her stump with every step. Every mile was agony. At a safe house partway through the crossing, she managed to radio London. She sent a message that her position was okay, but that Cuthbert was giving her some trouble. London, which had never been told that Cuthbert was a nickname for her artificial leg, interpreted this as a reference to an informant or a contact who might be becoming unreliable. The response from SOE headquarters read, "If Cuthbert is giving you difficulty, have him eliminated. Virginia Hall." Halfway across the Pyrenees in a November blizzard with a prosthetic leg destroying her stump, received London's instruction to kill her own wooden leg. She kept walking. She made it to Spain. Spanish authorities arrested her for illegal border crossing. She spent 6 weeks in a Francoist prison before the American embassy negotiated her release. She made her way to London. She had escaped. She was safe. She immediately asked to go back. The SOE refused. She was too compromised. The Gestapo knew about her. Her face, or the composite they had of her face, was on wanted posters across France. They couldn't send her back, Hall argued. She pushed. She wrote to her supervisor, "I thought I could help here, but I'm not doing a job. I am living pleasantly and wasting time. It isn't worthwhile, and after all, my neck is my own, and if I'm willing to get a crick in it, I think that's my prerogative." The SOE still said no, so she went to the Americans. The Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, forerunner of the CIA, was expanding rapidly ahead of the planned Allied invasion of France. They had no female operatives. They had almost no presence in France at all. They needed what Virginia Hall had. They hired her. At the lowest possible rank, second lieutenant, and the lowest possible pay, because their rules didn't account for what she was. She was back in France by March 1944, arriving by motor torpedo boat at the Brittany coast. She couldn't parachute in. The landing was too hard on her prosthetic, but she had a new disguise. And it was extraordinary. She had found a makeup artist who taught her to draw wrinkles onto her face, aging herself 20 years in minutes. She had visited a London dentist who ground down her beautiful, straight American teeth to make them look like those of a French peasant woman who had grown up on poor food and worse dental care. She walked differently, she dressed differently, she moved like a different person. The Gestapo was still looking for Virginia Hall. They had no idea that the gray-haired French milkmaid shuffling through the village of Chambon-sur-Lignon was her. Her second mission in France was, if anything, more consequential than the first. Under the code name Diane, posing as Marcel Montagny, Hall established herself in the rural Haute-Loire region of central France. Here she began the work that would define her legacy, training the Maquis, the rural French resistance fighters who would be critical to disrupting German operations during and after D-Day. She built a network of 1,500 people. Her lieutenants were extraordinary, a brothel madam with perfect intelligence on German officer movements and habits. A doctor who provided medical support to fighters who couldn't go near hospitals. A group of farmers who learned to lay explosives on railway tracks. Teachers who became saboteurs. Ordinary French citizens who followed this limping American woman into operations that could get them shot. She mapped drop zones for Allied supply deliveries, coordinates radioed to London, used to drop weapons, explosives, and money by parachute to resistance cells. She did this while continuously moving, never sleeping in the same place twice, always scanning the faces of people on the street for the flicker of recognition that meant she'd been found. She taught the Maquis how to blow up bridges, they blew up 4. She taught them to derail freight trains, they derailed dozens. She organized ambushes on German convoys. She coordinated intelligence about German troop movements that went directly into the Allied planning for the liberation of France. By the time Allied forces swept through central France in the summer of 1944, Virginia Hall's teams had killed 150 German soldiers and captured 500 more. The bridges they destroyed had delayed German reinforcements. The trains they derailed had interrupted German supply lines. The intelligence she had sent to London had shaped where and how the liberation was fought. Klaus Barbie never caught her, he never even came close. After the war ended, there was a small ceremony. General William Donovan, head of the OSS, personally presented Virginia Hall with the Distinguished Service Cross, America's second highest military decoration for valor. She was the only civilian woman to receive it during World War II. President Harry Truman wanted to honor her publicly. He wanted a White House ceremony. He wanted Americans to know her name. She said no. She told Donovan and the OSS that she was still operational and most anxious to get busy. She didn't want her face connected to her name in any public record. She was already planning her next mission. She would keep being a spy, and she did. Virginia Hall joined the CIA in 1951 and worked in its clandestine service for 15 years, operating behind the Iron Curtain during the Cold War. She finally retired mandatorily at age 60 in 1966, but her CIA years had their own injustice. The woman who had been the most effective operative in occupied France during WWII was repeatedly passed over for promotion, not because of her performance, which was, by all accounts, exceptional, but because she was a woman. Male colleagues she had trained, male officers who had never done anything close to what she had done, were promoted over her again and again. Virginia Hall retired to a farm in Maryland. She never spoke publicly about her wartime service. She knew too many people who had been killed for talking too much. She died in 1982 at age 76. For years after her death, even some of her closest family members didn't know the full extent of what she had done. So why did it take so long for the world to know this story? Part of it was Hall herself. She chose secrecy not out of false modesty, but because she understood that in her world, anonymity was survival. She had lived for 3 years, making herself invisible to the most efficient intelligence service in Europe. The habit didn't break easily. Part of it was the CIA, which declassified her records slowly and incompletely for decades. And part of it, the part that's hardest to say directly but needs to be said, is that Virginia Hall was a woman. And the machinery of historical memory for most of the 20th century was not built to preserve the stories of women who did extraordinary things. The monuments and the memorials and the textbook chapters went to generals and soldiers and politicians. Not to the women who operated in the shadows, who did the work that made the victories possible, who came home quietly and were quietly forgotten. The Gestapo put her face on wanted posters across all of France. They sent 500 agents to find her. They called her the most dangerous spy in the war. Her own country forgot her name. That's a wrong worth correcting. Virginia Hall grew up being told she couldn't work in the foreign service. She couldn't go back to France. She couldn't walk across the Pyrenees on a wooden leg. She couldn't train resistance fighters as a woman. She couldn't go back into the most dangerous country in Europe as the most wanted person in it. She ignored every one of those couldn'ts, every single one. The Gestapo couldn't catch her. The least we can do is remember her.